welcome to my channel if you haven't been here before, or welcome back if you watch my videos, and if you do, I thank you so much. I love to upcycle. I upcycle clothes, purses, accessories. I love making beautiful items out of discarded, unwanted thrift store finds or garage sale or whatever. And today we're working on this purse. And I sold for many years, and these were my, like I said in part one, my bread and butter for years. I only sold bags. And but now I do upcycle clothes and things like that. But if you're thinking about selling or you want to make one for yourself, this is a great tutorial. It's almost like a class. It's 2 parts. This is part 2, and we're going to get going. Okay, so this is part 2 of making a beautiful patchwork purse. In part 1, we made the front, and we sewed jewelry and fringes and things like that. Now it's time to start the back of the bag, and it will not be as time consuming as the front was. So let's get started. Okay, so in part 1, we started the back of the bag. And now I want to add some trims. And so I am going to use this scalloped gimp trim. It's kind of a greenish gold. And I want to lay one of these on each side here of this centerpiece. And I want the center of my trim to go right over that seam. And so I'll just go to my machine, and I won't pin this or anything, and I'll just start stitching down here at one end, and I'll make 2 rows of stitching since this is a wide trim. I'll go down one side, and I'll use a gold thread on this, and when I get done with that, I'll go back and go down the opposite side, and I'll do that twice. Now I want to add a pretty pocket on the back, and this piece of paper is the shape that I want my pocket. I want it to come to a point and sort of echo the shape of this bag. In order to make this pattern, what I did was I got a piece of copy paper, any sort of paper, and I just made a rectangle, and it's 7 inches tall by 6 inches across. And then I folded it in half, and on the side that's open here, I went from the bottom and measured 2 inches up. And then I just took a ruler and went from the point of the folded end and drew a line, straight line up to that 2-inch mark. And then I just cut that off. And that got us this shape. Now I wanted to use the floral for the pocket. So what I have to do, because this is really thin fabric, I am just going to double it up and sort of make a lining for the pocket. It's super simple. I just took my pattern and went to that floral dress that we used in the beginning in part 1. And I just took my pattern, traced around it, and cut it out. And then I went to my purple blazer that we used on the side here, and this will be the lining. I just did the exact same thing, laid it onto the fabric, traced around it, and cut it out. So now I have 2 matching pieces. Now I'm just going to lay these right sides together, and I will pin that. And I will start pinning just about 1.5 inches or 2 inches from the side at the top. I'll come all the way around, and I will pin. I won't put a ton of pins in here, but I will come all the way around and stop stitching here. I want to leave a gap open at the top to turn this inside out. Okay, so now I have this all pinned, and I left a gap up here to remind myself actually to start here and end here. Now I'll just go to my machine, and I'll do about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'll use a straight stitch and a fairly dark thread and get that sewn together. Okay, I have this all sewn, and it has a little gap at the top to turn it inside out. And now I'm just going to snip off these corners close to that thread. That'll just help it to have nice clean points when I turn it inside out. Get rid of all that excess fabric there. Okay, and now I'm just going to turn it inside out. Now I'll play with this a minute and make sure all the corners are nice and poked out, and then I'll show you what I do next. Okay, so now I'm at my ironing board, and first I just want to, I like to lay a tea towel over top of my fabrics because I never know sometimes how they'll react to heat, and I just want to give that a good press. Okay, and then what I want to do is that little gap, I just want to tuck those raw edges in and give that a little press. Okay. I'll finish pressing this and come back. Now I have this all pressed. What I'm going to do is go back to my sewing machine, and I'll use a matching or coordinating thread, and I'll just go over that entire top with sort of a top stitch. And I won't go quite 1/4 of an inch down. I'll try to stay close to the top and try to do that neatly because it's a top stitch and it will be seen. So I'll go to my machine with just a small, fairly small straight stitch and go over the top of that pocket. Okay, so now what I want to do is just pin that pocket onto the bag where I want it. And so I centered it this way, and then I took my ruler, and on mine I measured down 4 inches, and I always measure each corner because these can kind of get shifted around if you kind of eyeball this. This is one place where I do measure. So on this one I went 4 inches down, pinned it, 4 inches down, pinned it, pinned the center down at the bottom. Now I'm just going to put a few more pins in. And then when I'm done pinning, I'll go to my machine and I will just double stitch this. I'll go around it twice because pockets get handled and you want to make sure they're very secure. So I will just use a dark thread, start up here, and I'll try to stay as close to the edge as I can so I don't lose any space in the pocket. And I'll just go down this side, down the bottom, and up this side. And of course, we don't want to sew the top because we want that to be a pocket. And I'll go around it twice. Okay, so now the pocket is sewn on and functional. So now I'm going to do another little step, and I want to sew that taupey colored crinkly fringe that we used on the front side around this pocket, not across the top, but down the sides, the bottom, and up the other side. And you can fold over, if you're going to do this, fold over the very tip so it's a clean edge, but this is just so crazy. I don't think it even really matters if I do that or not. But I will just start sewing on one side, and I'll just do a fairly small straight stitch and a matching thread and just go all the way around and get that sewn on. Okay, so now I have the front all finished and the back all finished. And now it's time to put these two pieces together. Okay, so to put these together, I start with my most ornate, which is always my front first, and I just have to tuck all those fringes inside. We want to find the edge here of the fabric, so we need to tuck everything inside. And just take your time. You know, the more elaborate and fringy it is, the longer this takes, but just tuck everything in. Okay, now that we have everything tucked in, go to the back, and if that has any fringes that need to be tucked in, do that now. And then lay the right sides together. This is the right side, this is the right side. Lay them on top of one another, just like that. And now pin it together. I want to pin down the sides, the bottom, and up the other side, and not the top, because we want to leave that open since it's a purse. And how I start pinning is I go to the corners. I'll put a pin in the top corner here. I'll put a pin down here, one here, one here, and one here, just to make sure we have everything nice and lined up. And then I will just fill in with pins the rest of the way around. Okay, so now I have everything pinned except for the top. And I will go to my machine and stitch this together. I will start up at the top corner here and just sew all the way around. I'll go twice around because I want this to be extra durable. And I will use between 1/4 and 1/2 inch seam allowance. I kind of let the bag dictate at this point what my seam allowance is going to be. If I have a lot going on at the edges, sometimes I'll go 1/2 inch just to make sure I catch everything. But, you know, usually I go between 1/4 and 1/2. I just kind of eyeball it when I go. So I'll go get that stitched. Okay, so I have this all sewn together. Now at this point, you can trim off any excess that you have, if you have a bunch. I don't really have a whole lot. And then snip these corners close to the thread there, but not through the thread, of course. That'll just help the points be pointier when you're all done. Okay, now I'm going to turn it inside out. And I'll just take a second and push out those points and make sure everything's nice and tidy. Okay, so here's what it's looking like. And now I'm going to go to my ironing board, and I won't take you with me for this, but I will just lay a tea towel on the back side. Since the front has so much going on, I'll do this on the back. And I'll just lay my tea towel over top and just press those edges nice and crisp with my iron. Okay, so now I'm just going to set my bag aside for a little bit and start on the strap. Okay, so for the strap, I want a longer shoulder strap. And you can do any size you want. So for a longer shoulder strap, I went back to that purple blazer and I cut a piece out 32 inches long and 4.5 inches wide. Now I didn't have a long enough piece, so I did have to seam 2 pieces together to make the length that I wanted. Now at this point, if you want to do a crossbody bag, you can do that. You can mix and match fabrics and have this look like a patchwork. A crossbody bag typically is like 47 inches to a 54-inch strap. I'm shorter. I like a shorter crossbody, and I like my finished strap to be about 47 inches, if that just kind of gives you an idea if you want to do the crossbody. But I'm just doing a longer shoulder strap. Okay, so to make my strap, I have my piece of fabric laid out here on the table, and I have the right side facing me, the side I want to see facing me. And I also have a cord, or this is actually kind of a fat piece of yarnish thing. Basically, you just want something sturdy. Like a piece of yarn, a average size piece of yarn won't be sturdy enough because that'll break, because we will be turning this inside out with this. So, you know, a piece of cord or just anything you have that's kind of sturdy. Now, this is 32 inches long, and this is 42 inches long. It doesn't really matter how long it is, as long as it is longer than your strap fabric, okay? And so I just lay this down in the center, and then I am going to take my pins, set them right there, and I will just fold these over, right sides together, and I will start at one end and just keep folding and pinning all the way down until I get to the very edge. Okay, So now I have this all pinned along that open side. Now it's time to sew it, and I will sew the ends differently. On the end I start with, I will stick this into my machine this way, and I will go over top of that cord or whatever you're using like 7 or 8 times. I don't want that to be pulled out when I'm tugging on it. So I make sure that's super secure, and then I go straight across and then down, all the way down till we get to this end. And then when I get to this end, I do not go across the end here. I want it to be open. So this side will be closed and this side will be open when I'm done stitching. Now, usually I would say do a double stitch, go around it twice, but this one I'm just going to do once because I will be doing some top stitching on it, which will give it extra durability. So I'll go to my machine and get that sewn. Okay, I have this all sewn. This side is completely sewn shut and this side has an opening. Now I can take my scissors right now and I'm going to just snip the corner there so that we have a nice clean edge, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut that cord off. Now I am going to take this end and I'm just going to scrunch it down a little bit. Now the key to turning this inside out is starting at the bottom, and the wider your strap is, the easier this is to do. So this one will be really easy because it's short and wide. So the first thing you do is just kind of get that started on the end. We want to turn this inside out. And then you just kind of work from the bottom. Don't try to scrunch everything off at once. It will just get jammed up. But I do scrunch it down a little bit, but not all the way to the end. And I just keep working with it and turn that inside out. Okay, so now it's right side out. Now I'll just kind of work with that, get that corner. I'll take a little pin. I can snip off this cord now. And what I'm going to do next is just go to my ironing board. Now I've done it different ways. That seam, you can keep it in the center as you press it. The center, you know, underneath the strap. But I always do it on the edge up here, about, you know, 1/4 of an inch underneath the strap when I iron it. It doesn't really matter. You can have it at the very edge if you want. It all kind of looks the same. So I am just going to go to my ironing board and lay my tea towel over top of this and just press the strap so it's nice and crisp because I'm going to do a top stitch on it. Okay, so now I have this all pressed and I am going back to my machine and I want to use a matching thread, and I am going to stitch down each side of this strap. It just makes it look nicer and more professional. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It just depends on how the fabric is laying and how I think it'll work with the purse. But this one I want to do it. And I will just stick this in my machine and I will line the edge up with the side of my presser foot. I think that really helps me to get a nice straight line. These will be seen, so you want them to be nice and straight. And then when I'm done with one side, I'll go to my machine, or stay at my machine, and line the other side up with my presser foot and just go down the edge of that. So I'll go get that done. Okay, now I have the top stitching done on this strap, and I went back to my ironing board and just ironed it one more time. And now I want to add it to my purse. So how I do that is I go back to the purse and I find the side seam. Now it might be hard for you to see, but this is the side seam where we sewed these two, the front and the back, together. And I am going to take my strap and I'm going to find the right side. I want the right side laying against the purse. So this is my right side. And here's the seam. I'll lay it right over top of the seam so that the middle of that strap is over top of the seam. And I will just stick a couple pins in it so it doesn't shift around when I start sewing. And then I will stitch. So here's my strap kind of laying here. I have the strap lined up with the top of the purse on that seam, and I will just go over top of that at least 5 times. Different purses, the smaller the purse, the less important it is, but when you get into larger purses, you really want to stitch over that maybe 8 times, because you get a lot of stuff in your bag if it's large, and then it gets heavy, and you want to make sure these are nice and sturdy. So I'm going to go to my machine and stitch right across there. And then when I'm finished with that side, I'll come to the opposite side and make sure my strap is straight and in correct position. And then I will line the right side of this up with the opposite side, just like we did over here. Line that up with the seam and stitch over top of it. Okay, I'm going to go get that sewn. Okay, I'm at my machine, still working on the straps. I have one sewn, but I just thought I'd give you a little more details about sewing the strap. I always remove this front plate so that I can set my purse over top of this arm here. And I'll just take the top of my purse and kind of get it towards the needle here. And then my strap, I went right sides together. Now you might have this pinned already, but I really don't usually pin these. I just lay it over top and eyeball that. And this is, if you are pinning it, pin it on the outside. It's easier to find your pins and take them out if they're on the outside of the bag. And I will just stitch across mine probably about 6 times for this size bag. Okay, I have the strap all sewn on. Now it's time to work on the lining. Okay, so to make my lining, I found once upon a time this lovely tablecloth. It looks vintage. I don't know if it is or not, but I found it at Goodwill, and I just love the colors for this bag. So what I do, or what I did, was take my original intact pattern that I used for the bag, the front and back, and I just laid it over top of the tablecloth, and I traced it. You can use a chalk marker, whatever you want, and cut it out. And I did that twice. Now, this is flimsier than I want for my lining. I like it to be a more medium weight. This is thin, but it was just so beautiful that I want to use it. So this next step that I'm going to show you, you can skip if you have a nice weighted fabric, like a medium weight or a decorator weight. But since this is so thin, I have to do an extra step. What I have to do is I have some fusible interfacing. Now, you can buy this by the yard. You can buy it in little packages. I'll put a link to this in my description in case you want to try it or need some, whatever. So this adheres to the fabric with an iron, and it stiffens the fabric and gives it more substance. One side of this is smooth, and one side of this has tiny little glue dots. And I will show you how I attach this fusible interfacing. Okay, so how I attach the interfacing. Now this one isn't as large as my fabric, just because this was only like 15 inches and it doesn't cover the whole thing. So there'll be a little tip here not covered, and that's okay. I just want to make sure the top is, and if there's a little piece that it doesn't cover, no biggie. And so I laid this down, and you can feel it. This side is textured where the glue dots are. I lay that side on the wrong side of my fabric and just lay it over top. And then I take a thin towel, and I'm going to use a tea towel here and lay it over top. Now you may have to peek under there to see exactly where your edges are and things like that. And then I take my iron and I have the steam turned off. I don't want any steam. Now I'll just kind of find my edge and I will hold it down for 11 seconds. And then I will have to keep moving that. And I'll put a little pressure on it. And I don't want to do this. So when I have this done, I move to the next spot until I have the whole piece ironed and adhered to my fabric. So I'll finish this up and I'll come back. Okay, so I have that interfacing pressed on, and now I am just going to trim. I could trim it either way here. Just trim around that piece of fabric so you don't have excess hanging off here. I'll get that trimmed and we'll add pockets to our lining. Okay, so I'm just going to set my lining pieces aside for a second, and I made a pattern for the pockets. Now these pockets will be lined. In almost all my other purse tutorials, I show you a different way to make pockets, but for this one, I wanted them lined. So this is just a little bit of a different way. And I made a rectangle here that is, let's see, I didn't write the measurement in there. It is 6 inches, 6 inches tall by 5.5 inches across. And so I took that pattern and I want this to be my front. Now the back is kind of cute too. So yeah, I think I want the darker one to be my pocket. So this will be the right side. And I cut out 2, 1 for each piece of lining, just using that pattern that we had. And then I had the stripe, which is actually a curtain that I thrifted. And this will be the pocket lining. So I used this pattern and cut out 2 of those. So I have 4 pieces here. Okay, and all I do here is I want to put the stripe with the green right sides together and line those up, and I'll do it with both pockets. And then I'll take my pins and I'll pin this sort of like we did the pocket on the back of the bag, where we start about 1.5 inches here, put a pin all the way around, and stop here. We want a gap in the top that's not sewn so we can turn these inside out as well. So I'll get those pinned. Okay, so I have both these pinned, leaving a gap at the top so that I can turn it inside out. And I'll just go to my machine, use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and start a fairly small straight stitch. I'll start here, sew across the bottom, up the side, and a little bit across the top. And I will just stitch these once because we will double stitch them onto the bag, so you don't need to go around this twice. I will go get those sewn. Okay, so I have the pockets stitched, and I am just going to clip these corners like I did on the other pocket so that it's nice and smooth when I turn it inside out. And then I will turn it inside out. And I'll take my time and make sure all the corners are pushed out nicely. I already did this one. And then I went to my iron and I pressed this, and that little gap at the top, just like we did the pocket for the purse, you just tuck those in, the raw edges in, and press along the top. And now I'm going to go to my machine and stay very close to the top, less than 1/4 inch, and just do a top stitch to close that up. But I'll go all the way across so that it looks nice. If you just did a little stitch right there, it might look kind of weird. So I just top stitch all the way across, and I'll do that with both pockets. Okay, so now I'm just pinning my pocket, one on each side of the lining. I centered it this way, and then I took my ruler and I measured down at this corner from the very top of the lining 3.5 inches and stuck a pin in it. And then I went to this side and measured 3.5 inches and stuck a pin in it. This is one place where I don't eyeball it because these shift around and get kind of weird if you don't kind of measure that exactly. So they don't have to be 3.5 inches down, but they do need to be equal and stick a pin in there. So I am just going to my machine, and of course I won't sew across the top because this is a pocket. I will go down the side, along the bottom, up the other side, and I will stay close to the edge, less than 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I will go around that twice so it's extra durable. Okay, I have my pockets all sewn on, and I just want to do another little reminder here when you're doing lining as well as the bag fabric after you trace it, make an arrow which side is up. Because with this shape, it can get kind of confusing, and that way you don't make a mistake and put your pocket on upside down or sideways or something. So, okay, now it's time to do a magnetic snap closure, and this is just sort of my closure of choice. It's easy, is a big reason why. So, okay, so if you're not familiar, these are magnetic snaps, and we have kind of an innie and outie that snap together like that. And on the back, they have tabs, and these are your back pieces for the tabs. Now, these are 14 millimeter, and I got them on Amazon, and I don't really like the size. It's just what I have, so I go ahead and use them, but I wish they were bigger. I meant to order bigger ones. I don't know what I was thinking, but these work just fine. Just bigger ones seem more durable to me. So you can get them on Amazon, fabric stores, wherever. They're pretty easy to find. So I'll show you how to attach those. Okay, so I'm going to use one of the little back pieces to mark where I want the snap. So what I do is I just kind of lay it on my fabric about where I think I'm going to want it. And where I want it is 1.5 inches down. See, there's a center circle in the middle. So I'm measuring from that 1.5 inches down from the top of the bag to this center circle. See, there's 2 lines in a circle. So I'm measuring from the top of the bag 1.5 inches to that middle of the circle. And then down here, my bag is 11 inches wide. So half of that would be 5.5 inches. So I want that circle to be 5.5 inches. And so once I have that centered, I am just going to take a marker and carefully hold this and make a mark on those 2 side slits. See, like that. And then I need to snip them. So I will just kind of fold this over a little bit where those 2 marks are, and I will take the teeniest, tiniest little snip. If you cut too large, your snap will be loose, and you don't want that. I'd rather you cut too small. Just make a tiny little snip where those 2 black lines are. Okay. So now I'm going to pick either my innie or my outie, it does not matter. And those 2 tabs on the back, I am going to push those through the slits. Okay, there I have it pushed through. Now I'm going to turn it over on the back. And there are my tabs sticking up. And now what I want to do is I take a sturdy piece of fabric. I like to use denim, and this is about 1 inch by 1 inch square. It doesn't have to You don't have to measure it or anything. And I will also make those 2 lines with a marker on the 2 slits. And I will also just make a teeny tiny little snip here too. And now I will take that sturdy piece of fabric and I will put it over top of those 2 tabs that came through the back of the lining. And now I take the back piece that we've been measuring with and put that over top of the tabs. And then I usually use this because of the rubber at the end to push those tabs down. Some people push them in together and some people push them out. I push them out. And I will just like take that end of some sort of tool and push those out. And then I will just sort of tap it to make sure it's nice and down where it needs to be. Okay, so that's what that looks like on the back. That's what it looks like on the front. And now I am just going to do the same thing with the other piece of lining, only with the opposite snap part. Okay, so now it's time to sew my lining pieces together. And I will put these right sides together. You can snap it if you want. A lot of times it'll just naturally snap together. And I will get this pinned. And how I pin this one is we're going to leave an opening at the top. And then we will pin from the top corner here down the side and about a couple inches, 2 or 3 inches in. And we'll do the same here. We want to leave an opening at the bottom to turn this inside out and to slip it over top of the purse. We need to slide this over top of the purse to attach the lining. So we want to make sure we leave a nice size gap down here at the bottom. So I will get that pinned. Okay, so I have this all pinned, and now all I'll do is go to my sewing machine and start at the top. Stitch down the side using a fairly small stitch and a 1/4 inch seam allowance and stop at this pin. And then come to this side, do the same thing, stop at this pin, leaving a gap here, and go over it twice for extra durability. Okay, so I have that all stitched, and now what I'm going to do is just snip those corners off, just so it's nice and neat. And I'm going to temporarily turn it inside out just so that I can press it, but then it needs to go inside out again. But I like to make sure this is nice and pressed. Make sure the seams are nice and neat in the corners. So I'll go to my ironing board. I'll poke those corners out, those little points. That one's open. And just give that a nice press before I turn it inside out again. Okay, I have my lining pressed and I turned it inside out again. Now I'm going to move this over and bring my purse into view. And so now we're going to attach it to the purse. And so how we do that is you just take the strap. You need to basically move that down out of the way. Just lay it down alongside the side of your bag here. You don't want that up here. Okay, and so then you take your lining, and it really doesn't matter which side you lay where. You open up the bottom, and you slide your purse into the lining. What we want to do is line up the tops, the top of the lining with the top of the purse. Okay, so then we need to pin it all the way around. And how you pin this, basically it just matters really how you start it. So there's a seam on the outside of the lining, and there's a seam on the inside of the purse here. we want to line those seams up. If you line those seams up, then you're pretty much guaranteed that the snaps on the inside will line up perfectly. So I will just stick a pin where those seams meet here. And so the strap is right underneath of there as well. And then I'll go to the opposite side, find that seam, find the seam on the inside of my purse, and line those up. And pin these on the outside of the bag, not on the inside, because of the way we run it through the machine. You want to pluck those pins out as you go, and you don't want to be digging underneath your bag. So pin on the outside. Okay, so now we have the seams lined up. And now we just want to line up the rest. We just want the lining to try to perfectly match that on your purse. Line those up and pin all the way around. Now I'll get that pinned and I'll come back and chat with you. Okay, so I have my bag pinned all the way around, and now I want to sew it, and I want to make sure that front plate is removed because we're going to slide this over the arm, and this is why you want the pins on the outside so you can pluck them out as you go. And it really on this part doesn't matter where you start. So I'll just stick that. I like to line mine up with the presser foot. That's, you know, what is that, 1/4 or 1/2 inch seam allowance? It depends on how much fabric pieces you have up here, whether you go 1/4 or 1/2 inch. I usually let the purse sort of speak to me and see how much I need. So between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. And so I will just start stitching, and I normally say go over it twice. This time you only need to go over it once because we will be doing a top stitch, which will act as the second layer of stitching for durability. So I'll just go all the way around and just kind of shift my purse as I go. Okay, so the top is all stitched. Now I can pull that lining up over top of the bag. And just kind of make those points nice. You know, it's kind of a no-no to use your scissors to push those out, but I'm gentle. I don't poke my scissors all the way through, but I am just pushing these little points out. Okay, so it's attached to the bag and we still have an opening right here. Now, I have done hundreds of bags, so I don't need to press this with an iron or pin it. What I do, and you can pin it if you want, I need to tuck in these raw edges, and I will put my lining in right here into my sewing machine. And I will stitch very close to the bottom. I won't even go 1/4 inch. And as I go, I just put those raw edges inside, stitch over it, put those, you know, I just kind of tuck it in as I sew. Now you can do that all ahead of time if you want to. You press it with an iron or pin it, but I'm pretty fast. And I've done this so many times, I don't really need to do all that, but you can. So I am going to my machine and I am going to get the bottom of that lining all closed up. Okay, now my lining is perfectly intact, no more gaps or holes. I can stick it inside the bag. Now I will just take my time here and kind of line those points up together and make sure my lining is tucked in there nice and even. Okay, so now what I want to do is prep this for a top stitch. I want to do a top stitch all the way around the top so that this lining doesn't creep out, and it just gives it a nice, crisp, professional finish. And so to prep it, I have to iron it, I have to press it. And a little trick that I do is when I press it, I don't line those up perfectly. See, like that's lined up perfectly. I tuck my purse fabric over about 1/4 of an inch like that. And then I press it. That way you're less likely to see your lining from the outside of the bag. Now this step just takes, a little bit of patience, and take your time doing this. It's worth it to make this nice and professional looking. And so I will just continue taking my time, going all the way around and pressing that nice and smooth. Okay, so now I have that all pressed, and I will go to my machine, and I will, again, with that front plate removed, slide this over the arm. And I like to start in the back or near a strap when I start the top stitching, because this will be seen. You want it to look nice and neat. And so the bobbin thread will match the lining color, and your top thread, spool of thread, will coordinate with the outside fabric. And I just line this edge against my presser foot. That helps me keep a nice straight line, and I will just go all the way around the top of the bag with a nice neat top stitch. Thought I'd bring you over here and show you how that looks. It's really pretty simple. You just want to try to do a neat job. And I am going to start, here's an important step. I'm glad I brought you over here. The strap needs to go through first. That needs to go under your needle and up and out of the way. Otherwise, it gets all tangled up as you're stitching around. So, with that strap up and out of the way, I'm lining my presser foot up with the top of the bag. And I'm just going to do a fairly small straight stitch. And just slowly go around. Now, I used to pin this when I would press it. And I don't do that anymore. When I press it, it stays pretty where it's supposed to be. But I'll just check underneath now and then to make sure everything's all lined up. Okay, I'll get that finished up. And then I'll come back and show it to you again. Okay, now that I have the top stitching all done, I always do this. I go to the sides where the strap is, and do you see how there's a little bit of a gap right here? Because those straps are holding that open. I take this and push down the seam, and I almost fold that strap in half. Well, I do fold that in half right there. And I throw a tea towel over top of it to protect it. And I take my iron and I just give that a good press right there. I hope my steam isn't steaming up my camera. Now see how nice that looks compared to the other side? And I'll just come to the other side, press that down, throw a tea towel over it, and just give it a good press. Okay, I want to do one more thing before I'm done. Okay, what I want to do now is just decorate the strap a little bit. And I'm left-handed, so the way I carry this purse, this side would show the most, and I'm just doing one side. I'm not going to do both sides of the strap, but you certainly can, and I have before. So I took a little velvet flower, and in part one, I showed you how I make them because we added one right here. Well, I did the same thing, same dimensions and everything, and I am going to sew that right there. And then I'm going to take these little gold, antique gold looking beads, and I have 6 of them. And I will also stitch these on, and I will do like 3 below the flower and 3 above the flower. I don't know. I just think it adds a little extra to do that. I've sewn all kinds of things on straps. I've sewn fringe. I've sewn vintage buttons, brooches, jewels, beads, whatever. But I think it's fun to decorate the strap a little bit. So the only difference is, as far as sewing jewelry on, I always say match your jewelry and not the fabric of the bag. Well, on this one, you'll want to match the fabric because on the back of the strap, you don't want to see like a bunch of weird gold threads and stitching. So I want to try to match this fabric because on the underneath side of the bag, I don't want it to show. So I will get these stitched, and I'll stitch the flower just like I did the one here. I'll put some stitching in the middle and then 3 other areas to the bag. Okay, so here's the strap all finished. And you know, if you sell your bags or you want to sell, it's details like this. It's that little extra love that you put into it that really sets your bags apart from the others. So I'm going to throw it on and show it to you one more time. Okay, can I show you one more thing real quick before I throw the bag on and kind of model it for you? If you sell or want to sell, especially artistic bags like this, people will want your signature on them. And I've tried many different ways. You know, you can create fabric labels, embroidered, have someone do it. I think that looks really cool. I just never took the time to do that. So what I always did was I went to eBay and I typed in the search vintage hang tags, and I would take a hang tag. They would, you know, someone would cut those out and create those. And you're also supporting sort of a small business as well. And I would take a black marker, a thin black marker, and sign the bottom of these. Now here are a few others that I have used, you know, and then just sign the bottom. And that way you can say they are signed, and it's super easy. Okay, so those are some of the ones that I've used. And then I just use these little gold safety pins and just pin them on my bag somewhere. And you have your signature on them. Okay, I'll show you the bag. Okay, so here it is again, all finished. Here's the strap. So unique, right? I have the little signed hang tag on the back here. Now, when I sold, I did this a lot. I would put little surprises on the inside. Sometimes I would pin like another extra brooch that somebody could wear or pin on the outside of their bag. Or let's say it's a gift for your mom and you have a vintage hanky inside that says mother on it. So many fun ideas. So I appreciate you watching so much, and I'm going to just do a quick little slideshow when I'm done talking here of purses I've made and sold over time in similar patchwork style, but there'll probably be different shapes and colors and fabrics just to give you more inspiration on the fabrics you can use, the embellishments you can use, the fringes. So stay tuned for that if you'd like. Thanks so much.